Welcome to the Michigan Golfer Show. Join us each week as we explore the people, the places, and the events that shape our great game.
Hi, I'm Jack Berry, and I'm up at Forest Dunes in Roscommon, and speaking today with one of the #1 golf course designers in the world. You've heard of Michelangelo, you've heard of Rembrandt. Well, we've got Tom Doak here, and Tom is, of all the golf course designers I've known, he is the most unique, and he designs the most unique golf courses. And Tom's a member of the Michigan Golf Hall of Fame a couple of years ago. Congratulations.
Thanks, Jack. It's nice to be here. Nice to be home for a change.
Right. And Tom's course here, the Loop, which is, we'll let him explain it a little bit. Tom has 5 in the top 100, and he's got a bucket list battle going with Crenshaw and Coore, who also have 5. And Tom's newest course here is the Loop, and it's a real unusual one. It has its beginnings back in St. Andrews, the old course. Is that right, Tom?
Partly St. Andrews. Honestly, the thing that got me thinking about reversible golf courses was a book on golf course architecture written by Tom Simpson, the old English architect. And he would do courses for, like, rich people's estates that were only 3 holes or 6 holes. And that would get boring playing the same 3 holes over and over and over again. So he experimented with making them reversible. Which apparently is something that they used to do in the old days on links courses in the winter to kind of spread out the wear and tear. They'd play St. Andrews backward for a month in the winter, and North Berwick occasionally too. And so Simpson's book included an appendix, and he just spent about 5 pages talking about trying to make a reversible course. And he had a great diagram, which is 3 holes and how different they would be going backwards. Little island fairways that were, you try to drive it 2 for 1 hole, but they'd just be the approach for the hole coming the other way. And I looked at that 20 years ago or 25 years ago and thought, well, that would be cool to do somewhere. But I didn't know if I'd ever have a client that wanted to do it. And the more I thought about it, you had to have just the right piece of land. I mean, if it's too hilly or if there are too many trees, something's going to get in the way and make the hole that's backwards not be very good.
Well, a great golf course brought you to Michigan, is that right? Crystal Downs?
It is. Actually, the first time I came to northern Michigan was when I was in college. And I was trying to get around and see some of the best courses by the famous designers I could. And there was this course listed in the book by Mackenzie, Crystal Downs, which nobody could tell me about at all. It was like nobody had been there. It's a summer club, and it's kind of off the beaten path a little bit, and it didn't get a lot of play other than member play. So I decided I'd check it out myself, and I wrote a letter to the club, and they said, well, if you're coming in May, there's hardly going to be anybody here, but the pro will be here, so he'll play with you. So Fred Muller and I played in the spring of 1982 when I was a senior in college 35 years ago. And I just love the golf course. I saw it at probably its worst condition ever that spring. They hadn't sprayed for snow mold the year before, and they just fired the greenkeeper. And it was really pretty bad, so I couldn't get any good pictures of it. And I thought, I got to get back to this place. And I came back in the summer of '86 after I'd been working for Pete Dye for a while, and sort of at a crossroads in my career. I could either go work for his son in Japan, which didn't sound that interesting to me, but I didn't really know if I could design a golf course on my own or if anybody would trust me to do it. And I came and spent a week up here at Crystal Downs, mostly hanging out with Fred. And maybe 2 weeks after I was there, Doug Grove, who was the pro at Grand Traverse Resort back then, called Fred and said, yeah, I know somebody that wants to build a golf course over here, and they're not going to pay any of the big name guys, and I just don't want them to hire the same people that build everything else up here. So do you have any ideas? And Fred was like, yeah, he was just here. And that's how I wound up designing my first golf course when I was 25, 26 years old.
And then did you stay here? Did you move to Traverse City at that point?
I didn't buy a house right away, but I was here for 2 years building the High Point. I went to Myrtle Beach for a year to build a course down there. But I was coming back. They just opened High Point, so I was coming back to see how it was doing. And then we did Black Forest after that. So I was back up here for a year and a half, and that's when I was getting married. And we didn't know where we ought to wind up long term, but at the time, most of my work was up here, and I thought clients would want to come see the work, so I bought a house in Traverse City, and that was 28 years ago.
You started with your first courses in Michigan, and now your latest course is right outside here at Forest Dunes. And how did that come about?
Well, believe it or not, it came about when I think it was, I can't remember, it was 3 or 4 years ago that I went downstate for the Michigan Golf Hall of Fame induction. And a bunch of old friends were there, people that I hadn't seen, people I used to see a lot up here in the old days, but I don't see so many times on the plane headed to New Zealand. And 2 of them were Norm Sinclair and Nick Ficcarelli. And I was talking at the induction that early in my career, I was like, wanting to get outside and not be just a Michigan architect. So it was really important to go and build courses in other places. But at this point in my life, it would be nice to build something around home. And I hadn't had a chance to build anything around home for years and years. Of course, they hadn't built many courses at all in Michigan the last 10 years. So Nick and Norm that night came up to Forest Dunes for some event. And the GM was talking to him about, yeah, we're thinking about building another golf course. And they're like, you have to talk to Tom. He was just talking about this today. So I really owe them for, throwing my name into the ring.
Well, terrific. And you've got, getting out of Michigan, you've got these courses in New Zealand, 2 of them now. I've been to, because of you and Fred Muller, I did get to New Zealand once and played the Wapa or Parapara Umu course and had a great time playing there, but there wasn't that much golf in New Zealand at the time, and now it seems like, man, you've opened the gates down there. So you've got 2 courses there, Kidnappers and how do you pronounce Terra 80, right?
That's the new one. Yeah, I mean, New Zealand is one of the most beautiful places in the world. I try to describe it to people from the States, and I don't think they can relate. But it's like having the whole west coast of America, from the mountains in Vancouver to San Diego, and flipping it over because the mountains are in the south, but only having as many people as are in San Diego in the whole country. So it's very spread out, and it's a bunch of small, one big city, Auckland, and then everything else are small towns and lots of open space and a ridiculous amount of coastline. The first course I built, Cape Kidnappers, it was a 5,000 acre sheep station before it was a golf course. I mean, they were grazing sheep at $3 a head or something. So it was kind of a remarkably simple use of a beautiful piece of land before Julian Robertson, my client, came around and bought it.
And television with some of the PGA pros out there kind of gave that course a lot more notice, didn't they?
He did have an event there a couple of years after we opened the golf course, just bringing, his idea was to bring 4 of the best young pros to play a match for $1 million first prize. And the first year it was Adam Scott and Anthony Kim and Hunter Mahan and Brent Snedeker. Not bad, and and really fun for me because I don't really build courses for those guys very much, but kind of a small event. There was maybe a crowd of a couple thousand people there, but I was walking inside the ropes with Mark Rolfing for most of the day, watching them up close like I used to go to practice rounds back 30 years ago, and it's remarkably different. I used to go hang out with Ben Crenshaw some in practice rounds, and I got to watch him play with Seve and all those great players. And they all had, they never tried to hit a straight shot. Everything was a fade or a draw or something. They were trying to work the ball somewhere or another. These guys now, they just hit it as hard as they can and as straight as they can. It's partly because the equipment's changed and it allows them to do that more, but they also don't seem to have any fear at all about going for it.
It seems like in the list of the top 100 courses, there aren't that many courses that are played by PGA Tour or even major championships, other than, say, like Augusta and Pebble Beach. But why do you think that is? What that the courses that you grew up looking at and admiring don't seem to be the courses that those guys play. That it's a different game, kind of a different.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, the first is that, you know, in the 60s and 70s, the courses that were on tour were about the only courses you ever saw much about at all. They had all the television exposure, and you know, the magazines didn't pay as much attention to other golf courses and what was being built then. And so the course, especially a place like Riviera or Harbor Town that you'd see year after year after year, would just be ingrained in everybody's mind as, boy, that's a great golf course. And now the rankings are different, and you've got all these guys that travel. It seems like it's a full-time job being a panelist for the magazines now, to travel around and see all these places and compare them. But it's a different group of people rating golf courses, and they're maybe less impressed with, you know, tournament sites, especially old tournament sites that have been around forever. But then I think another part of it is that whether it's the equipment or the players getting more physically fit and stronger and really working, you know, it's really a combination of both. But the gap between the average player and the tour player has just gotten immensely bigger in the last 30 years. I mean, I used to be able to go out with great players, and if I hit my best drive of the day and they hit a bad one, we were fairly close together. That's not going to happen anymore. Their worst drive is 60 yards past me. So I think that the golf courses that are built for them are getting harder and harder for the average person to relate to anymore. And you see that tournaments are more and more moving to modern courses because a lot of the old courses don't have the room to make themselves long enough to really challenge those guys.
Well, and you've had the opportunity, you plus drop in when you were at doing Black Forest and you had Gil Hands and Mike DeVries were working for you. Is that yeah? Wasn't that something? Gosh, I mean, three of the greatest designers in the business now, with all beautiful golf courses. And what's the difference between doing those courses now and the way that you admired Alistair McKenzie and the other guys? How has the technology changed, or how do you go about it now?
Well, you know, I guess my revelation in the business was that it doesn't have to be that much different. Certainly we use different equipment and the budgets are different, and there's a lot of things that we have to worry about on most new projects that the old timers didn't have to. I mean, we don't have to, you know, they didn't have to worry about where the cart path was going and how to hide it from view because there wasn't any golf carts. They didn't have to worry so much about drainage systems and irrigation systems. They pretty much just built everything lay of the land, and those things came later. And of course we have modern construction equipment instead of teams of laborers with horses pulling little drag pans around to change things an inch at a time. But I sort of looked at the business when I got started and thought that everybody had let the technology change what they built too much. Just because you've got all that stuff doesn't mean you have to move mountains on every project. And if you've got a good piece of land, you can go back and build it kind of the way the old guys did and, leave more of it natural and not tear up the native ground covers that are there and just build greens and bunkers like they used to. And that's kind of been my approach ever since. I was really lucky to get those couple of first projects I did were on good pieces of land that we didn't need to tear everything up so much. And they looked way different than everything else that was being built at the time, and they attracted attention. It was very much a retro style, and now it seems to be the mainstream style again.
But it's, say, the courses that you've been doing recently, you've had a lot of nice land. Does that be
I think that's an
correct?
understatement.
Yeah.
I think that
And courses are built out. They're not in the metropolitan areas anymore, the way that those old courses, like all those Ross courses, were built in cities.
Right. Of course, those, Oakland Hills was kind of out in the country in 1924 when Ross was there the first time. So, we're always working on the edge of, even when we're building a course in town, it's always out at the edge of development. I used to say, I'm on site if we're just on the fringe of cell phone coverage because we're always just a little further out than where the land gets cheaper. But you're right, in the last 10 or 15 years, I've been working in places like the Oregon coast and Tasmania and New Zealand and places where nobody thought of building a golf course 50 years ago. And if it wasn't possible for people to travel, especially to go see those places, there's not nearly a big enough local population to support them. I mean, the only way those courses work is if people are coming from all over because they read about them in the magazines and want to see for themselves.
Well, that's proving to be true, and when the top 100 courses are courses that people can get to.
Well, I can vouch for the fact that you can get almost anywhere in the world now if you're willing to sit in airports and on the plane for long enough to do it. I mean, that trip to Tasmania to build Barn Boogaloo was about 28 hours each way when I was doing that, and I did it like 7 or 8 times for a construction project.
Wow. A lot of frequent flyer miles there. What have you got going on now that the loop is open? How has that been received, and what do you hear from it?
I think the golf course has been really enthusiastically received by people in the golf business. I mean, when we talked about it in the beginning, they were confused or curious about what we were doing. I don't think they really all understood the concept or could visualize it very well. The feedback from golfers has been tremendous. It's been, I hear a lot. Well, I didn't even realize it was the same piece of ground the next day. It just looked so different. Because even though you're playing to the same greens, going the other way down the fairways, it's a completely different background, and you're looking at the green from a completely different angle. And it's not easy until you get, until you miss the green in the same place you did the day before. Then you might have virtually the same shot that you had yesterday, but until you get down to that level of details, it really is a different course. And the people in the golf business, I've had a lot of architects ask in detail how we did certain things, because it's not like nobody ever thought about it before. It's that nobody ever really seriously thought about trying to do it. Tom Weiskopf was here just before we started. He came up for some outing for the old course at Forest Dunes, and they showed him the plan and asked him what he thought of it. And he just smiled and said, I've thought of doing something like that, but I never have taken it that far, because I always worried about, well, how are you going to make the shot values work into the green if one hole's a short par 4 going in there and the other one's a long par 4 coming from the other way? How do you make a green work for both? But Tom will give it a good shot. he'll try to figure that thing out. And I think now there's, I know of 2 other reversible courses that are being built right now. One's in Oregon, one's overseas in the Netherlands. And I've had a couple of people ask about trying to do something similar. Again, you can only really make it work on certain pieces of land. It's not like everybody's going to try to do it.
Now, how did you sell it here? How did you come up with the idea? Lay that out for them.
Like I said, I've had the idea in the back of my mind for a long time, and I've never really. There's only one time I ever even brought it up as a possibility to a client who didn't go for it. But when I came over here the first time, walking around the land, it's not very dramatic land. It's relatively flat. I think there's only about 30 feet of elevation change from the highest point to the lowest. And the trees had been, it had been logged a couple of times, so there aren't many big trees. It's it's a pleasant looking landscape, but it's not like full of real specimen trees. And then I thought, this kind of would fit that idea. It actually might work here. So then I came in and talked to Lou Thompson, the client, and said, well, what are you looking for? The main problem this place has always had is nobody stays. It's the closest course to Detroit, and they either play here on their way north to Gaylord or on their way back, and they don't even stay. They don't even stay long enough to have a beer after. They're in the car and gone. So, we're running a big clubhouse operation and a restaurant, and, we're losing money on that end. And, I really want them to just stay here and not go to Gaylord and go out and play again the next day. And that kind of clicked in my head. And then he said, the other thing is, I want something that'll really wow people and attract attention to the place. And I'm like, okay, this guy might be the guy. And the good thing is, Lou wasn't, he's bought a couple of golf courses now and is operating them, but he wasn't in the golf business per se. So he wasn't the kind of guy that had to go back through what would people in the golf business think of that? He just heard the concept, and it definitely fit the two things that he'd asked for, and he was ready to go. He just, that's exactly what I want. But, a lot of my other clients, even the sophisticated ones, would have asked something like, well, what are the Raiders going to think about that? And I don't know what the Raiders are going to think about it. I told him, after we got started, I'm like, they aren't going to know what to do with this. It doesn't really fit into their box. They're not even going to know whether to call it one golf course or two golf courses. We're going to have to tell them what we want them to do on that front, or otherwise they're going to be really confused. But, I guess partly because he already had the other golf course here and it was rated highly, he didn't have to worry about that so much. But beyond that, he's building something for the customers more than for the Raiders. And as long as the customers like it and are intrigued and want to stay and go play the next day, it works. And then, the one thing that I didn't really think of when we started this thing, but people in the golf business have said to me is, if that works, you don't have to find as many customers. If you can actually get people to stay for 2 or 3 days and play the golf course again, that's way easier than finding 20,000 new faces to show up.